I think the biggest challenge we're going to see is the instant payment push. So you have FedNow and the RTP network, which are operating on a 24/7 by 365 basis. So those funds that are flowing as credit transactions are being made immediately available to the receivers of them.
Hey, Mark, can you explain the concept of ACH funds availability and its significance in the financial industry?
Yeah, absolutely, Patty. It's interesting, obviously, with the recent rule changes from NACHA regarding the delaying of ACH funds availability. It's an interesting time for us to consider this topic. So, obviously, you have your regulatory frameworks that you have to follow, your Reg CC requirements when it comes to electronic funds transfers. But when we look at the ACH rules, there's very specific requirements under the rules regarding ACH funds availability. And it's all about really promoting the integrity of the ACH network and ensuring that it's a viable option for folks when they're receiving funds. So when we look at the ACH rules, we have our prescribed timeframes, which are actually better for receivers on the ACH front than it would be under Reg CC, because you're usually getting those funds available to you on the same business day that they were received. We also have the considerations of the same day ACH funds availability requirements, which allows windows of time in which those funds are made available to you even sooner. Now, with the recent rule changes from NACHA, we have the added benefit, though, when we have credit push fraud schemes that are occurring, that the institution can take some time to be thoughtful in their approach of reviewing those transactions and ensuring there's no issues. So now we're able to actively delay the funds availability, still following our Reg CC guidelines, as long as there's a legitimate reason for the institution to do so.
Kind of like if they suspect something's not right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So, can you try to explain to me the technology infrastructure that supports ACH transactions?
Yeah, so obviously the ACH network is, what an almost 50-year-old network that's running up very similarly to the way that it did 50 years ago. However, there have been modernizing factors in place to really change the way in which the flow of the transactions occur, mostly related to the timing. It's a good way to really expand on the concept of same day ACH, where we're now running ACH transactions within the same business day, making the speed of funds availability increase, because we have three different windows that we're operating in under. So you have your morning window, your early afternoon window, and then your later day window, which the later day window, it really was all about California trying to make sure that the West Coast is able to reap the benefit of same day ACH.
Right. Yeah, I remember they complained about that. So it was
Yep.
a benefit to them to get that last window in. So, what are some of the most common challenges that banks and credit unions face regarding ACH funds availability?
Well, to me, this is all about the exception processing. So, when credit unions and financial institutions are looking at making exception based decisions, that's where the funds availability really becomes a little bit challenging for them, because you do need to meet your ACH rules requirements while at the same time abiding by Reg CC. So, really, when we look at the rule change to allow them the exception based decision making, it helps them really overcome those challenges where I have a one off transaction. I'm not sure what I need to really do with this transaction, but I don't want to make it available to the receiver and have a scenario in which those funds go out the door. So now you have that opportunity to really be a little bit more thoughtful. One of the things that could be challenging, though, and I think there's going to be some work in educating the industry on, is making sure they understand what those exceptions really are and when it's okay to do it versus I just want to, carte blanche hold everything under the Reg CC guidelines because I'm concerned about fraud across the board. We really need to make sure everybody understands this is for special cases and not something that you can unilaterally do across your entire customer or membership base.
So, I understand the challenges with that. But let me ask you another one, which is, I think, would present even additional challenges. How does the international ACH transactions, how do they, work with the funds available there? Are they the same? Are they different?
Well, you still have your standard funds availability requirements. Obviously, there's challenges with international or IAT entries today with the same day requirements or same day structure, although Nacha is actively looking at that. So we might see some more information on that front this coming year. But I think to your point, Patty, the biggest issue there would probably be the OFAC screening that occurs on those IAT entries. It really still speaks back to those exception processings as well. You know, do I have a potential hit here? Am I concerned about where these funds came from? Is this normal behavior, normal activity for the receiver's account? And these are all things that, as receiving financial institutions, our RDFIs, they really need to be thinking about. We don't want to be passive participants in the network any longer, just kind of flowing the transactions in, saying it's fine, it's all on the ODFI if something happened. We really want to take that active role in trying to determine if there are any potential issues. But I think that's the biggest challenge with IATs is what happens if there's a potential hit and what do I do with it?
That brings me to my next question. So I know, what role do we at Niche and Niche U play in solving these challenges? And the first thing that pops into my mind is our education, right? How we educate our members. What would you say?
No, I totally agree. And it all has to do with that partnership that we have with our members as a trade association operating in the payment space. We really want to make sure that we are addressing these complex, different scenarios that come up. And we're not just giving you what the rules say, because anybody can do that. Anybody can hand you a piece of paper or a PowerPoint deck that summarizes what the ACH rules require. It's up to us, I think, as a trade association to really work towards how do we interpret that, take that information back to our members and say, here's the information, but these are the different angles that you need to consider it from. These are the different business decisions that you need to make. And it really comes down to the whole idea of Niche U and the foundation behind it, which was the idea of tangible case method type of learning where we're actually taking things and turning it into real world examples. So I think we play a real pivotal role when it comes to supporting our members through how to interpret and turn these into business decisions.
So I have a couple more questions I want to ask on ACH before we switch gears and talk about wires. What strategies or technologies do you think have proven the effectiveness in addressing ACH funds availability, the challenges that we've had? What do you think we've done to improve on that?
Well, I think some of that is still a challenge in the industry. So I know from like a core service provider standpoint, one of the things that we still run into is how do we prove compliance? So with your same day ACH rules, you have the requirements to prove that you made those funds available to the receiver. Well, those are usually like your memo post logs that will give you the information as to when that was memo posted to a receiver's account. Some systems are great and you have an audit log where you're able to capture that information. It's really easy for you to prove compliance there. In other cases, you may be completely reliant on the third party and don't get any transparency or insight into those types of logs. So I know from like an audit perspective, sometimes you're pulling up the most recent transactions that day just to show that it was memo posted correctly. But it really needs to be that I can show any transaction, I can prove my audit log as to when I received that transaction, when it was posted to the receiver's account. So that to me is one of the biggest challenges we still face is the reliance on these different third parties really makes it so that we may not always have all the information that we need to prove compliance or to make effective business decisions. Now, on the flip side, I do think a lot has been done like with fraud monitoring systems such as Verifin, where we're able to now gain better insight into trending activity, consumer behavior analytics, anomalous activity detection. We're able to see a lot more transparency into what this transaction means and what it could be as far as a red flag trigger. So I think we have a lot more work to do as an industry to really improve the systems, but I do think we've come a long way as far as the fraud detection side of things.
You know, I remember years ago, the NACHA rules changed the funds availability from, if you received your file by 5 p.m. the day before, you had to have your funds, the credits for consumers by the opening of business or 9 a.m., whichever's later, remember? And we've changed that to 9 a.m. There's no more or later. And it also encompassed all the non-consumer transactions that came in. Do you think that there are any additional regulatory changes that we might see out on the horizon that would affect even more funds availability for the ACH?
I think the biggest challenge we're going to see is the instant payment push. So you have FedNow and the RTP network, which are operating on a 24/7 by 365 basis. So those funds that are flowing as credit transactions are being made immediately available to the receivers of them. The ACH network does not have the ability to match that. Definitely, same day ACH was a huge modernizing factor. It improved the viability of the ACH network. But what about all these other transactions? So if I'm not doing a same day entry, or if I don't catch that window, now I have to wait like 3 or 4 hours, or maybe the next business day before I receive the funds. I think that proves a challenge for the ACH network and the viability of it. Now, there are definitely use cases that make more sense for the ACH network. You know, when we think about traditional payroll, batch processing, that all makes perfect sense for the ACH network. But when we think about things like gig economy type of payroll transactions, where I'm paying a gig worker that day for the work they did,
Mm-hmm.
or if I'm looking at emergency situations, you know, Patty, you have an emergency, you need funds right away so that you can address whatever that situation is. Waiting 2 to 3 hours is not really as viable as me sending it to you and you getting it within a few seconds of initiation. So I know the ACH network is looking at that. There's conversations happening about extending out the same day ACH windows where we're processing more of them. That's going to increase the complexity and it increases the compliance requirements for RDFIs too, though. So there's a lot of considerations there. But I think that's probably the biggest challenge we're facing in today's environment.
What advice would you give to a institution looking to enhance their funds availability practices?
I would just make sure that they have a solid understanding of what the regulatory requirements are. So what are your Reg CC requirements? What are the ACH rules requiring of you as well? And then also making sure that you understand those exception cases. You know, if you run into a scenario where you aren't sure about what you should do with this, what course of action can you take and what are the steps that you should be doing? And that's, again, a great opportunity from a niche education perspective where we're able to really kind of fill in those gaps for you. We also have our payments hotline, so our members can always reach out to us with scenario-based questions. So, you know, our learning experience isn't the end of what we offer. Having the payments hotline where we can be advisors to you and actually walk through those scenarios is also a critical component.
The last question I want to ask you on ACH, Mark, how does improving the ACH funds availability benefits both? I know it benefits me as a consumer. How does it benefit both the FI and the consumers?
Well, the financial institution side of things can be a little bit more complex. So obviously, when you're making funds available to the receiver sooner and there's still a potential for returns, that's where it becomes a little bit sticky for the financial institution. I'm not going to say it's not beneficial to the financial institution. I think it makes them more competitive. It gives them the ability to work better with their members and their customers. But I do think it's probably important for them to recognize too that when you are making those funds immediately available to the receivers, you aren't negating your risk of returns or the risk that something is going to come out of the network and there's going to be a fraud scenario or you have a bad actor player in your institution. So I think there's a lot of like pieces to think about. You know, obviously with credits, there's a little bit less risk to the financial institution because because it's the RDFI side of things and they're receiving funds.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that there's not still other factors at play that could cause losses if they have a money mule in their institution, if they have a bad actor. So I think it's just really important that the institutions not only understand the compliance and the regulatory pieces that we need to be looking at, but they also understand the nature of their relationships and the nature of the transactions.
So I think I have a few more minutes. I've been wanting to ask this question. What do you see? Because I know you're such a futuristic guy. What do you see as the future of ACH transactions, particularly when it comes to operational efficiencies and technology integration? Where do you see us going?
So with ACH, one of the things I would love to see us do, and I think that there's going to be some push for the ACH network to do this at some point. I think we really need to adopt the ISO 20022 data standard on the ACH network side of things. So there's no active plans. This is just Mark's opinion. But without adopting the ISO data standard, which makes those transactions data rich, it makes them very easy from a input and analytical standpoint, because all the other networks, wires are moving to it in 2025. FedNow and RTP have already adopted it. With ACH working more off of a legacy data system, it makes it challenging to make that data and information usable. It also makes me concerned about the long-term viability of the network. So if the ACH network doesn't modernize in that way, and all of a sudden we start using the ISO standard more prevalently, obviously it's used for the processing, but it's more the information side of things that's critical there. If that doesn't happen in the ACH network, it makes me think that use cases will continue to migrate away. I don't think the ACH would ever go away, but I think use cases would migrate from one network into other networks because they would become more user friendly. And that could also be true on the ACH, the funds availability side of things too. If it becomes much more viable to use FedNow or RTP, what does that mean for the ACH network? The other side of that, I do think, though, is that like data integrations through APIs, through artificial intelligence solutions could make the usefulness of the ACH transactions and the operational processes much more efficient. Because if we start to integrate our systems in better, if we're able to automate the manual processes at play, we could see a lot more efficiency gained on the network.
Well, that actually segue into I promise, my last question. How does improving the ACH funds availability contribute to the overall efficiency of the ACH payment system, would you say?
I think the ACH funds availability side of things, really, it has to do with the receiver of it. So it's all about making sure that we move towards that future state of payments where Europe and Asia already are today. We want to be in the same position where we're not lagging funds for them. And I get it. From a financial institution perspective, there's a little bit of risk there if I'm not receiving my funds from a settlement perspective. If I'm worried about making funds available to a bad actor or whatever, there's a lot of things that the financial institution needs to think about. But if we look at it from a strict industry and future state perspective, making it so that the ACH funds are available as quickly as possible makes the experience for the receiver better, and it just improves our overall payment processes as a country. So,
Yeah, I would agree.